Hey everyone, and welcome to the tutorial series for the Procedural City Generator. Today we'll be taking a look at building interiors. And actually, it's going to be pretty straightforward. The first thing we'll do is we'll take a look at the actual design of my interior blueprint. I have a slide you'll see in a second there. It's important that you understand the full setup and the reason why I'm designing things the way I'm designing them. Then we'll take a look at an actual building and the entire setup so you can see how it works in practice in Unreal. And then finally, we'll take a look at how to add our own props to that building and then how we actually set it up. So before we even jump into Unreal, I want to show you guys this little slide here to explain the design of the interiors in PCG. So you can see from left to right, there is one main class that holds all of the information for the interiors of a building, and we're calling that the interior BP, right? The interior blueprint. This is the top level class, and this is the class that you assign in the zone itself. When you add the buildings, notice that there's a place right there that says what is the interior blueprint. This is the class that you would add there. The interior blueprint is going to detect when the player is nearby a building with triggers, and then it'll decide whether it needs to spawn the props or not. But then the interior building can have one or more interior floor blueprints, and these are meant to be separate blueprints per floor for the building. So if you have a house that has one or two floors, you may opt to simply have one floor blueprint. Keep things simple. But if you have a building like an apartment building with 10 different floors, then ideally you'll have one blueprint that is going to represent those different floors. And that means that you can actually use the blueprint to not only represent one specific floor, but a range of floors. So for example, in the apartment building, you could have one floor blueprint that's going to be the first floor, that's like the little tea shop. Then another interior floor blueprint that is going to represent all of the different apartment buildings, every floor. And then finally, you could have another floor blueprint that is going to represent the roof. So with that setup, you could have a separate one for the floor. For the first floor, another one for all of the floors in between, and finally another one for the roof, because they're obviously going to have different content. Furthermore, each individual floor blueprint can have a series of actors. You can have static actors. Those are going to be usually static meshes. That's usually the furniture, right? The couches, the tables, etc. You'll have dynamic actors. Those are going to be actual blueprint classes, blueprint actors. Typically in PCG, those are going to be doors. So you know, as you're going through the apartments or the houses, and you get to a door and you press E to interact, the door opens. That's obviously an actual blueprint that is spawned at runtime. Then you have random actors, and these are also blueprint actors, but these are going to spawn randomly, right? Conceptually, these two are basically the same, but I made sure that I divided them in two separate lists. That way we keep things more organized. And finally, we're going to have specific blueprint actors that are not tied to the floors, but are tied to the interior blueprint itself. And these I'm calling the global actors. And a good example of that would be, what if you want a blueprint actor to spawn in the building no matter which floor the player is located, right? So if you go with this setup, and the player is on the floor number 2, only these actors of this blueprint will spawn, right? But what if you want something to always be present no matter the floor? Say, for example, an elevator, right? Well, the elevator would be a perfect candidate to have them set up as global actors. As soon as you enter the vicinity of the building, no matter the floor, these actors will spawn. And to drive the point home here, this is the building we'll be taking a look at today. And I have this little graphic here. So you'll see that we have the interior building blueprint, which is going to be a big trigger all around the building. Then each individual floor will have its own trigger volume, and this is going to be obviously the interior floor VP. And then each individual floor can have static actors, dynamic actors, random actors, and then global, it's really part of the interior, but it can be anywhere on inside the building. So that is the general setup. So with that said, if we go ahead and jump into Unreal, I've done something very simple here. We are in the test map that I showed in the last tutorial. And all I did is I've added this industrial building here, and I've added the interior blueprint class. That would be the equivalent of this class here, the main class. And what I've done is I've parented this blueprint to the building, and I've zeroed out its location, because that's exactly mimicking how it would be spawned when you're using the generator here through the menu. Now let's see what happens. And actually, let's go ahead and start really far. And let's see what happens if I'm really far from the building and I press play. And I'm going to eject, and I go all the way to the building. We see that now, even though we're playing, nothing is actually spawned in this building. You can see that we have no props. The elevator is not there. There's nothing. And then as soon as I start going nearby, you'll see at some point, you see there, we have now props that have spawned. And now you see that if I go nearby, we have some of the props on the first floor that spawned. And we also have the elevator that spawned. But if I go to the second floor, notice that I still have this part of the elevator, but no props for the second floor and no props for the third floor. That means that this elevator is probably a global actor, and these props are tied to the floor. And to illustrate this even more, what we'll do is we're going to navigate to where these assets are, and these are going to be in blueprints, buildings, interior. Then in this case is industrial and industrial 1, if you want to follow along. And you'll see in this folder that we have all of the blueprints that are part of this system, right? The top level blueprint is BP interior underscore industrial 1. And then each floor is a separate blueprint. It says FL1, FL2, and FL3. I'm just going to open all of them real quick. Again, I want to hopefully explain the setup. So if we look at the interior blueprint for this building, we see that we have a few options here. We can either show or hide the trigger, and we're going to do that in just a second so you can actually visualize it. We have a trigger scale, very, very easy to understand. We have a trigger height multiplier. You'll see why that matters. And then you have floor details. This is where you're going to specify the details for how many floors that building has. So there are two ways of doing this. You can either specify a floor height and a number of floors, or you can specify a floor height by a list, by a specific list. In this case, it'll be an array, and you can add your floor height to your list here. If you have a building that has every single floor at the exact same height, like maybe a skyscraper that has every floor exactly like 2,000 units high, then you can easily put the floor height here and the number of floors and not use the floor height at all. And then the blueprint will calculate the height for every single floor by obviously multiplying this value by this value, right? 360 times 1, 360 times 2, etc. But if you have a building that has different heights for the floors, for whatever reason, like it is in this case here, even though the floors look like they're pretty much the same, they're slightly different in height. That's the way it was modeled, and that's okay. Depending on the model you're using, you may want different floors to have different heights. In that case, you select Use Height List, and then you specify the actual height for the floor for each individual level. So the first floor starts at 115. Why does it start at 115 instead of 0? Because notice that even though 0 will be the floor, there are some steps here that you have to step on, and then the actual floor is elevated from the ground. That's why it's 115. Then the second floor is 570, 900, and 1240. These you'll have to know and experiment. There's no easy way for you to know this. You'll have to basically manually figure out the actual height. Once you have the floor details and you say, okay, now we have 4 floors, because I'm including the roof here, and you enter the heights, then you can look at the floor actors. And these are the actors that are actually going to spawn. So for the first actor here, and notice that this is an array, so you can enter as many actors as you want. We have a struct that says, hey, for this initial actor, how many floor actors do you want to add for this initial category? Notice that this is also an array, and in this case, I'm using FL1. But because this is an array, you can enter many different floor actors for the first floor, and the spawner will pick a random one when it spawns. So you have the option of having randomness per floor by specifying a different blueprint right here. In this case, I'm not adding randomness, I just have one blueprint. And then this blueprint has a specific setup. I can either say, I want this blueprint to spawn on all of the floors, on a specific floor range, or in specific floors. So if you select all floors, obviously it will spawn in all the floors. If you do floor range, then you specify a minimum and a maximum, right? So from first floor to fifth floor, for example, you can do 1 and 5 here. Or if you have specific floors, then you use the values here called specific floors, and you can enter more than one and they're comma separated. So say that you wanted this blueprint to spawn on the first floor, but also on the third floor, you could do 1, 3. So lots and lots of flexibility here. So specify the specific floors where this will spawn and specify the classes. If you take your time, you can put a bunch of different blueprints here and change the range here to make it even more varied. In this case, this floor is only going to be on specific floor 1. This one is going to be on specific floor 2. And this one is going to be on specific floor 3. So there is no randomness right now in my setup. And the reason for that, I just didn't have enough time. It takes time to set things up. But now that you guys understand, after the end of the video, we're going to do one more of these. You can then experiment and make as many variations as you want to make it truly random. So that's how you set up the floors. Then the other option is disable collision. And this is something that I ran into on Discord. A couple of people were not understanding why the buildings did not have collision. And this is the reason why. By default, I am disabling collision on all of the buildings that are away from the player. Again, it's just another measure to keep the city as performant as possible. Only when you get nearby and you would trigger the interior props, only then you would need collision with the building. You can obviously disable this and then the building would have collision. But if you're really far away from the building, there really isn't a reason for it to be calculating collision all the time. And that's the main thing. So let's go ahead and right here, change the setting to show the trigger and disable trigger hidden. That way when we are in playtime, we can actually see the trigger. And now you can see the trigger right here in yellow. This is the trigger that will spawn the interior blueprints. As soon as you cross this trigger, then you'll see the blueprint spawn. And let's grab each individual floor and do the same thing. I want to see the trigger and I don't want it to be hidden. I want to see the trigger and I don't want it to be hidden. And the same thing here for all of the floors. Let's go ahead and click save. And now here's what happens. If I click on play, notice the trigger here. This is the interior trigger. And when I cross this, look what happens. Notice that the floors have been spawned. So I'm going to go ahead and eject. And you can see that this trigger here is the interior trigger. As soon as we enter this trigger, all of the floor blueprints are automatically spawned. And if I try to select it here, you can see them right here. Floor 1 is this trigger. Floor 2 is this trigger. Floor 3 is this trigger. Still, we have nothing that has spawned. Notice that only the global spawns, like the elevator, have spawned, but not the floors, because the floors have their own trigger volumes. And why is that? Well, that is because we only want the spawns that are nearby the player to spawn. So look at what happens when I overlap the first floor trigger. Now that it's obvious, only the first floor props have spawned, but not the second or third floor. And that's the reason why we have the different floors that we do. And of course, as I'm walking around, going up the stairs here, I am now triggering the second floor. And you can see the props here. And going up, I am triggering the props again on the third floor. But if I go ahead and eject, notice that the second floor is still there, but the first floor has now despawned. And that's because I'm purposely overlapping the triggers. You can see here there's an overlap just to have the floors spawn just before the player goes up to the floor, right? You don't want it to spawn as the player is exactly at the same height. But that is the main point of having the floor blueprints. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and take that out. And then what does each individual floor look like? So now this is floor number 1. We're going to have a very similar. We're going to have the trigger options here. We're going to have the trigger scale, X and Y and Z, important, depending on how high you want this to be. Then you have the static actor list, interactive actor list, and random actor list. And if we go back to our little PowerPoint here, this is what I've been talking about right here. Static, dynamic, and random. And dynamic should have been interactive. It was wrong on the slide, but it's actually called interactive here. And static actors, if I open the list here, is asking for an actor class. And this actor class right here, if I open it, is just a bunch of meshes. It has a combined root and it has a bunch of static mesh components, which are all of the static actors that will be spawned. All of the barrels, all of the crates, all of the little tables. And that is pretty much it. If you look at static number 2 for floor number 2, it'll be exactly the same. And that's the idea. And if you wanted to have interactive actors, even though I don't have them here, it'll be the exact same idea. You would just click on the plus sign here. You would add the actual actor class and the location. Notice that for these, including the static actor list, I have a % chance to spawn from 0 to 1. So in this case, I always want this blueprint, the static actor to spawn. So a 1 means 100%. But you could very easily add many static actors to the same floor and have different % chances to spawn to further add randomness. So notice how now we can add random floor blueprints per floor, and inside each floor, random static actors, interactive actors, or random actors per floor. So you could really go crazy here and have a huge amount of randomness per building, to the point that that it wouldn't really look like it's the same copy of the building. Even though they look the same outside, inside it will be quite varied. Now, one thing I want to show you guys is how to create one of these actors here. So the easiest way to explain something here is, let's just drag this guy here. This is the actor of all of the static meshes for the first floor. And if I go ahead and parent this to the actual building, and I zero out the location, notice that the props are all wrong. They're all kind of messed up. you can clearly see that the props are sinking into the ground and they don't look right. The location doesn't look right. And that is because of where the pivot is for this entire blueprint. So if I go to the interior floor 1, to this actor here, notice that we have an actor transform. And if I make this bigger, we have some values here for location. And these are relative values. So if I put negative 650 and 235 into the location here, what's a negative 650 and 235? Notice that now the props look like they're in the right place. See that? But they're not at the right height. And the reason for that is because the height is actually calculated by the floors right here, by the floor details. So I don't have to worry about putting an actual height here. I just care about the X and Y and the rotation. And this may look a little complicated, but let me show you exactly why we do it this way. So let's go ahead and delete this, and let's try to create our own blueprint here to add additional actors to this building. So I already have the content browser open for some of the props for the industrial buildings. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this barrel here, and we can just do whatever we want. This is going to be a simple example. I'm going to have a barrel here. Let's just do another one here, and let's do another one here, and duplicate it here, and let's just do like a little pyramid. Let me make this a little slower and duplicate it here, and maybe we do it like this. Maybe we want to add these props to the first floor. So let's go ahead and select all of them, and maybe we want to rotate them like this, and we want all of these buildings to be here. So the easiest way to do it is in the level, as I have it, drop all your static meshes, go ahead and select them all, and notice when you select them, the last selection that you have has the little widget. When you combine them all, that last place of the widget will be by default the pivot of that new blueprint. So keep that in mind, because the reason why we are using those offsets is to help you with this pivot. So see how I selected it? If I just select it haphazardly, then the pivot is going to be right here. If you can, it's best to try to pivot to a mesh that is at the floor and in the middle. Then when we have all of this selected, actually, you know what? Let's just do it the wrong way so I can show you how I did it. Like this. So we're going to purposely have the pivot in the wrong place. That's fine. Now that I have everything selected, go to Blueprints. Convert selected components to blueprint class. Select an area, and I'm just going to do SM industrial. Yeah, let's leave it like the barrel 6. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to put it at the root. And you can see that now we have a new blueprint with all of our barrels. And here, if you wanted them to simulate physics, you have to manually select them and select simulate physics. There we go. Compile and save. Great. Now, look what happens when I grab this blueprint and I parent it to our building. Notice that now, when we parent it to our building, the blueprint keeps its actual location, but now the location here under the transform is a relative location based on the location of the building. And these values here is what we are going to be putting into the actual floor blueprint. So if we wanted to add these blueprint to the first floor, we would open interior floor blueprint floor 1. Let me just close these other ones so it's obvious. Floor 1. and this is going to be a static actor. So we go to our static actor list and we click on plus. We're going to add this one. And the actor class, it was something like barrel 6. And now we want to add on the actor transform what we're seeing right here. 725, negative 877. 725, negative 877. And if we have a rotation, then we can do that. In this case, we have no rotation, 0 rotation. So we're going to go ahead and click on compile and save. Now, we are going to delete this. And we are going to hit play. And we're going to go back. And as we enter, notice that now we have our barrels here. There you go. It's as simple as that. So it does take a little bit of an adjustment, especially that offset is the trickiest part. But if you follow the process that I explained to you, how to parent it to the building in the scene and then look at the relative location and rotation, all you need to do is put those values here, and then it should spawn easily. One more thing I wanted to show real quick is if you select the interior class, that's the top level, there is an option here for start loaded. Because what happens now is, say that the player starts right here. At the beginning of the level, you're going to start right here next to this building. And I click play, and nothing happens. The building is empty. The reason for that is because this is just the way Unreal works. For the trigger to be activated, you need to overlap it. And usually if you spawn inside the trigger, it's a little bit harder to detect if the player is actually inside. So if I walk all the way out and I walk back in, then everything works as expected. But if I spawn in here, then it doesn't work as expected. So for those rare occasions where you need the buildings to spawn near the player, you have the option of start loaded. Start loaded means that it's going to load all of the blueprints regardless of whether the player overlaps or not. So now, if I click on play, you notice that everything is loaded now for this building. However, notice that all of the floors are loaded. So in this case, if you have a 20-story building and you need to start loaded, all of the floors will be loaded that one time. Of course, once you go up and you leave the trigger, then you'll see that the regular function goes back to normal, right? This despawns. But just keep that in mind. When you spawn the first time, if it's loaded, everything will be loaded for all of the floors. But that's okay because we want to just click play here and see what happens. Which is, sorry, right here. And you can see how things are spawned. Now, let's see that one more thing I wanted to show you guys is the % chance to spawn. What if we wanted these barrels to appear only a certain amount of time, a certain % of the time? This is how you add variation. You may want to have a static actor class that always spawns, but maybe you want to have additional little details. So in this case, for these barrels, instead of 100% chance to spawn, how about 50% chance to spawn? And now if we click on play, in this case, they spawned. And if I click play again, they spawn again. And guess what? They're going to continue to spawn indefinitely. Even though it's a 50% chance to spawn, for some reason, they're always spawning. You would think that even though it's random, at some point, they would not spawn. And here's the reason why. Because I'm using a seed. What you want is you want controlled randomness. So for every single building, I'm using a different seed number, which allows the building to be random, but random only at spawn time. Meaning that in this case, this building, even though it was 50% chance for the barrels to spawn, these barrels will always spawn in this building, because what you don't want is for the player to overlap here and see the barrels and then leave and then come back again, and then the barrels have the maybe not spawn this time because it was only 50% chance. What you want is that 50% chance to be different per building, not per spawn. And that chance is used by the global seed that you have right here. So if you click on the interior building here, you actually have a utility called Randomize Seeds. And for every floor, notice that we have a different seed. These seeds are generated when you actually spawn the building using the regular UI. You actually don't need to come and press the button. But I have it here for demonstration purposes. So if I click on Randomize Seed, every floor gets a different seed. So now if I press play, they spawn again with this seed. And if I go back and select another seed, let's see if they spawn now. And they keep spawning. You're gonna make me look bad, but the point is, I'm gonna change the seed to like 22. Depending on the seed for the first floor, it may or may not spawn. 100. Hopefully, let's see here. Nope. $122. Nope, still spawning. Randomize the seed. Come on. Nope. All right, I'm gonna try 2 more times, and hopefully it doesn't spawn one of these times. It's still spawning. It's 50% chance, but it's based on the seed. All right. Well, hopefully you can take my word for it, or if you're following along, you can change the seed yourself, and you can see. Oops. No, it's sorry. 0.5. There you go. Not 50. That's why. 50 really meant 1, because I'm changing it to the maximum of 1. Sorry about that, guys. There you go. Now it's not spawning. See that? But if I change the seed, and now it's 31 for that floor, now it spawns. See that? All right. So that was my bad, but you can see that you can control randomness per floor by changing the seed values here. So say that you have a very important building, and for gameplay purposes, because there's a mission here, you really want these barrels to spawn. After your seed is generated, you can come here to the actual building, and if the props don't spawn on that floor, come to the interior blueprint and physically change the seed until it spawns. And these seeds are saved with your level in the instance. So once you change that seed, then you know for a fact that it'll always spawn. Sorry, it's a little convoluted, but hopefully you guys understood why I'm doing it that way. So 50% chance for this to spawn, and that 50% chance has to do with the seed. Finally, I know this is going long. I want to show you guys 2 different methods of despawning our actors. By the way, adding interactive and random actors is the exact same process, so I'm not going to show you guys. There's also a despawn method. You can either hide the objects, that's default, or you can destroy the objects. Okay? Why would you want to do that? Well, here's the difference real quick. If I click play, and I am interacting with my objects, look at this big mess that I've made. Right, I'm just gonna make a big mess. And look at this big mess. And I go up to the top floor, and I come all the way here, and I'm just gonna make a mess here as well. And I go all the way up again. And now I'm going down to the first floor. Notice that the mess is still here. That's because I'm hiding the props once they are spawned. So when I come back, they are in the exact same place that I left them before. If I choose to have them destroyed, which is more efficient for memory, because hidden means they're still in memory, if I have them destroyed, here's what happens. I'm sure you'll already figure it out, but we make a mess. We go all the way up. I'm coming to the third floor to make sure that they despawn because I don't want to overlap the trigger. And then when I come down, everything's back to the way it started. Everything's nice and neat. And that's because we destroyed all the props and then we respawn them at their original location. So this is more memory efficient than the other method. So keep that in mind. I personally prefer hide. If you have if you have objects that are interactive, then you probably want to use hide. But if you have a building where all of the props are perfectly static, meaning they will not change location, then you probably want to have the method of destroy. That way, if the player goes to 500 buildings in one play session, all of those props, as soon as he exits the building, will be destroyed and garbage collected, and you guys don't have to worry about it. If you have everything on hide and the player goes to 500 buildings, all of those props will not be destroyed, they'll be hidden, just in case the player goes back to the building 2 hours later, the props are how he left them off. So to solve that problem, I have something called delayed destruction. And basically it's a timer. And by default is there. If you decide that you want to hide your objects, as soon as the props are despawned, or in this case hidden, there's going to be a timer that starts, and in this case is 300 seconds, 5 minutes. And if after 5 minutes the player has not overlapped it, come back to that location again, the props will be destroyed. So you can make this timer way longer. You can make this like 20 minutes, right? Or whatever you want. But at the end of the day, if there's a long play session and the player is moving all around the city, going inside every building, you eventually want to destroy those props after a long time, right? And you see that in games. Maybe the game remembers the location of the props for a certain amount of time, and this is the way I'm addressing it here. Alright, that has been a very long video, guys. Sorry, but I wanted to cover as much detail as possible. I would highly recommend that you guys, now that you understand how things work, look at how I've set up some of the buildings, especially the apartment buildings in the commercial zone. You'll see how interesting it is, where I have different blueprints for different floors and how things are randomized. And once you get how everything works, hopefully, even though it's a bit complex, it should be fairly intuitive. And again, if you need to pause the video, I think this slide right here kind of explains everything in a very nice way. So that is pretty much it for this video, guys. If you have any questions about interiors, let me know in the comments below. DM me on Discord or send me an email. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.